Hey guys, Bugcat7 here. Okay, it is Friday, April 17th, 2020, and I want to thank you for visiting the Stonewall Research Channel here on YouTube. I really do appreciate it. Alright, guys, well, we're going to continue on in my series looking at accounts of the quote unquote giants or large hominids, as I like to call them, state by state. And the next state up is Arizona. And if you don't know, I've covered before on my channel while I was reviewing C.W. Ceram's book, The First American, a video on Arizona that covered Snaketown, Arizona, and the Hohokam, which in the ancient Pueblo language means those who have vanished. So it's just interesting that these people there that Harold S. Gladwin did so much research on at Snaketown, Arizona, and with the Hohokam people, and he was roundly harassed by his fellow archaeologists. He's a person from New York, I believe, some sort of business person who decided to become an archaeologist. Had the money, went out to Arizona, and discovered all of these sites in Arizona, Snaketown being one of them, the main one. And as it turned out, as I go over in the video from C.W. Ceram's book, The Survivors, the Hohokam, they had many skills that were quite far advanced for anybody at the time. Um, as mound builders, as a matter of fact, under one of the huge mounds there, large mounds there, they found a stone with a piece of metal pipe through it on some, like a 50-foot platform by 300-foot mound, and supposedly there was a land marker that was buried. For what reason? It's just a ridiculous explanation for that. And also, they had etching 500 years before the Dutch painter Albrecht was experimenting with acid etching and art, and the European armorers of the time who started experimenting with etching on armor. So these people had that technology 500 years before they did, according to, whatever timeline they're going by there. Probably long before that, by my estimate, but in any case, they also had superior canal building skills, and C.W. Ceram just wondered how they could have accomplished what they accomplished without, by today's standards, a team of surveyors and then implementing a large construction project that would probably cost millions and millions of dollars by today's standards with, industrial construction equipment to, do the work. So he was just amazed that these people were able to accomplish it and then also to maintain it as well, which would require this constant maintenance and management systems there to accomplish what they were going to accomplish. So, and above all, they had very strange phenotypes and elongated, long type skulls, which Harold S. Gladwin had the bad sense to say something about it, and then he was like roundly criticized by all his fellow archaeologists, and as a type of guy who sort of wanted to fit in and report on his archaeology. It mentions it in this article here that he revised his findings there a number of times, of course, to suit the likings of the archaeological elite at the time, which in all cases were all amateur archaeologists. Archaeology was just in its sort of nascency still at that time, lacking all the modern forensic type equipment. So, in any case, Arizona is the state we're talking about here. And if you haven't seen my video on Hoholcomb, it's pretty interesting what these people were able to accomplish far back, into the Stone Age. So, take a look at that if you care to. So let's get into Arizona over here because it seems to be a place where some of the extremely large skeletal remains are found, including many of these, fossilized, footprints and petrified skeletons and large guns and muskets that no human being could handle. Very weird stuff. So first here we have Apache County 18 to 20-inch Triassic shoe prints, and they're saying it's moccasin feet. These giant human footprints were found near the petrified forest in Arizona. Notice size as compared to a human foot of today. A bit blurry there, but you get the idea. Some old newsprint or something. Recently, I found impressions or tracks in Moen Copy Triassic sandstone near the petrified forest in Arizona that were evidently made by the shoes or moccasins of a human giant, probably antediluvian, before the supposed flood and ice age and all this kind of other nonsense. But it's much more than that. Zoology above and more. These footprints measure from 18 to 20 inches in length. In the photographs illustrating the find, there will be seen recent carvings of some boy's initials, but the erosion shows the foot imprints to be very old. The giant was evidently standing on the soft sand, and his feet sank in, leaving the depression or track. Not many miles from these giant human tracks are the well-known dinosaur tracks near Cameron, Arizona. Truly, the fertility of the soil, as well as its moisture supply, has greatly deteriorated since these giant reptiles and giant humans roamed these plains. Thus, the primitive writing of, quote, footprints on the sands of time, unquote, attests to the truth of Holy Writ. Degeneration, not evolution, is the apparent verdict. And here's, this is Chris Leslie adding to it here. And whether you're religious or not, or whatever it is, but he doesn't call these things giants. He calls them greater ancestors. And I agree with him in a lot of this stuff. And like the degeneration, or not evolution, or devolution seems to be involved with these giants of the past. So they eventually integrated with native peoples and absorb their DNA and then even out inside because we would have a lot more of Homo sapien DNA and then the giant DNA at some point. And that what needed to happen because their cells needed to grow smaller in a new gravity. That's what I say. But you believe what you want. By comparing the size of Mr. Peterson's shoe with that of our petrified forest giant, we might well conclude that the latter was from 10 to 12 feet tall and probably weighed more than 500 pounds. Together with this superb physical development went a giant intellect that would shame the mental aberrations of degenerated man. The tracks found near the petrified forest compare favorably with those found in the gypsum flats of the White Sands of New Mexico. Both locations show about the same size and shape of sandal. In the case of the Arizona tracks, the giant was standing, while the New Mexico tracks indicate that the man was taking giant strides. Ellis Wright, a government trapper, first reported the discovery of these tracks west of the White Sands, now a national monument. 13 footprints were found in all, each about 22 inches long and 8 to 10 inches wide. On the side were found marks apparently made by a staff or cane the giant was using. Other tracks, apparently human but of smaller size, have been dug up dug out of sandstone quarry at Ash Fork, Arizona. The conclusions from these remarkable discoveries are crystal clear, but have far reaching repercussions. Degeneration, not evolution, has been the fate of the human race. If it was indeed what these things were human, with horns and tails and other strange anomalous skull configurations, I don't know about them being human. Finding human tracks and dinosaur tracks in the same formation prove them contemporaneous rather than separated from 60 million to 120,000 years, thus collapsing the geological age theory. I guess 60,000 to 120,000 years, thus collapsing the geological age theory. Evolution has always leaned on the geological age theory for its main support. Therefore, with the collapse of the geological age theory, the generalization of organic evolution also collapses. So, the ideas were small and getting bigger, not that we were bigger and got smaller, is what he's saying. But maybe it has nothing to do with that. He's just talking about different hominid species that we don't know anything about. Chino Valley, 9 to 10 feet tall. Prescott, Arizona. Nearly every issue of the papers during this last week has had something to say about an expedition going into Mexico to search for the bones of a race of giants. Why go to Mexico? Several years ago, Bill Singleton, a boss on the highway, told me while working on the road through Chino Valley, some human bones were dug up which, when compared with those of the average man today, indicated that they belonged to a race of men who measured between 9 and 10 feet tall. Jess Kibble at the Proofmans will verify this statement. Another interesting find in this section was one made several years ago between Dewey and Humboldt, a new piece of road cut into an old burial ground. Del Days, now dead, doing some digging there, found two skeletons lying side by side, each about 4 feet long, and each having enormous heads. Beth Gray, a mining man in a section who saw the skulls, said they were so big that it would take a number 9 hat to fit them. So they found half of the skeletons or whatever it is. So, again, it's interesting. It seems to be like the people at Galena Canyon, that a shameful way of being buried for a vanquished enemy would be to bend them over backwards and sort of snap them in half, and their necks were snapped and everything else, which they found over and over again. Just, I think this is a way to humiliate a vanquished enemy by burying him like that. Prescott, Arizona giant skeleton. Giant skeleton found upon Arizona ranch. The skeleton of a human being twice as large as any man living today was found here by Peter Mars on his farm northwest of here. The skeleton is perfect. The bones do not resemble those of ancient tribes found in Verde and other valleys of this country. So, it was 1911 is this report here. One of the most wonderful discoveries of prehistoric life that has ever been made in Arizona was reported yesterday by Peter Marks of Juniper and corroborated by E.S. Clark, attorney, which reveals the existence of a race of people that is not generally accredited to the primitive era, in the huge proportions of a skeleton that is now in the possession of Mr. Marks. In detailing what was discovered by mere accident on his farm early in the present week, Mr. Marks gave the following interesting account of his discovery. Quote, "The bones of this monstrous human may have represented a race of men or a single individual. At any rate, the skeleton of a man in my possession is sufficiently complete so that the dimensions, which are astounding, may be accurately ascertained, and so far as the present generation is to be considered, from what I can learn, there is no comparison to be formed. In the first place, the skull is of such abnormal size that if an average man of the day placed it over his head, he still would find room to move it backwards and forwards and up and down with ease without disturbing his natural position. From measurements taken of this skull, a number 10 hat would be required to fit it. The teeth, several of which are still embedded in the jawbone, substantiate the immense size of the head. As to the bones, there is no dispute disputing the fact that the owner was symmetrically formed of immense size and Herculean strength. The thigh and lower limbs indicate at least twice the size of an average man today. Weekly Journal Miner, Prescott, Arizona, 1911. So, and I think Chris adds a little comment here. Peter Marks's ranch are listed in the Smithsonian Annual Report from 1911 because of the stone ruins found on his property. I spoke with the National Park Service and they informed me that the Marks Ranch is now on private land. The other turn of this story is reported in the Arizona Journal Miner, October 13th, 1911, page 3, titled Refuses to Sell Skeleton of Giant. Mr. Marks was visited by a Mr. Shoup from the Smithsonian who took pictures of the skeleton and offered to buy it. Marks refused to sell, at least at that moment. From the article, quote, Mr. Shoup, the former attaché of the Smithsonian Institute at Washington, who made the long journey especially for the purpose of viewing the frame of the giant of other days, was provided with photographic instruments and took several pictures of the freak. He also desired to take it to Washington, but this request was held up by Mr. Marks until later, and after he ascertains whether Arizona desires it for its probable state museum, unquote. Jim Vieira, research done by Jim Vieira, Your Daily Giant, 12/25/2013. So here's a follow-up on it. This guy refused to sell it. All right, and here's an agent from the Smithsonian just taking the skeleton, not interested in the dig site so much, but interested in purchasing the skeleton and for what purposes. Okay, brought back to Smithsonian and then later on buried. It seemed that at this time the consensus wasn't firmly formed yet that these people did not exist. That was, when the whole people who came in like Moore and Alice Herdlischka, that's when they insisted on certain things that didn't comport with Darwinianism, such as giants existing in the past and devolving into smaller people in the Americas, especially here. So, so again, with the Smithsonian, and who knows how many it seems from what we've read in the accounts in the various states so far, that these people from the Smithsonian were often dispatched, as which I call before I even started this series that this is what they were doing. That they were buying up all these skeletons, not so much interested in the archaeological sites, but to acquire all these skeletons by purchasing them and then just disappearing them into the vaults there at the Smithsonian or whatever. And many people have tried to find out, such as Jim Vieira and Fritz Zimmerman and L.A. Marzulli and other people have tried to find out from the Smithsonian where these things are, and they're often given the runaround by the Smithsonian. And of course, any mention of giants is going to be an automatic denial. There's no such thing. There's only anomalous, slightly more robust people involved and nothing to get excited about, see. So, and even just by today's standards, by the research that I've done on my channel here and the history of human height, even by today's standards, somebody 6 foot high or better would be somebody of unusual height by today's average height standards. Prescott, Arizona, giant skeleton. I think somebody's just covering the same thing over and over again, but it's interesting to see what they say. Giant skeleton found upon an Arizona ranch. The skeleton of a human being twice as large as any man living today was found here by Peter Morris on his farm northwest of here. The skeleton is perfect. The bones do not resemble those of ancient tribes found in Verde and other valleys of this country. So, just an affirmation that the skeletal remains don't look like anything like the native peoples. Okay, so I think he's just repeating the Jim Vieira article in this. Okay, we don't need to see that. The Hubbard petrification. In this magazine for September 1923, we mentioned a reported discovery by Mr. Samuel Hubbard of remains of giants in the Grand Canyon of Arizona. Owing to press unreliability, we did not notice this to a great extent. We have now, however, obtained more knowledge on the subject, and there remains no doubt that Mr. Hubbard has actually made a discovery composed of petrified bodies of two human beings about 18 and 15 feet in height. That's absolutely huge, respectively. One of these is buried under a recent rock wall, which would require several days' work to remove. The other, of which Mr. Hubbard took photographs, is in a crevice of difficult accessibility. The bodies are formed of a limestone petrification embedded in sandstone. Again, petrified bodies and petrification seems to be an electrical process, as they go over on the Thunderbolts channel with the research of Peter Mungo Judd. The Hubbard footprints. Okay, in this magazine for September 1923, you mentioned a reported discovery by Mr. Samuel Hubbard of remains of giants in the Grand Canyon of Arizona. And he made a discovery composed of an ancient beach, now sandstone, containing a great number of footprints of a giant race, men, women, and children. The prints of adults, about 17 to 20 inches in length, and corresponding in size and shape to the Carson City and Blue Ridge prints, which are other large footprints found in different areas of the country down in the southwest there. But again, we can go to those, but I want to get on with this because there's a lot of reports here of these particularly large um, evidences of large hominids, just extremely large hominids there. Crittenden, Arizona, between 10 and 14 feet tall. Near Crittenden, Arizona in 1891, workmen excavating for a commercial building came upon a huge stone sarcophagus 8 feet below the surface. The contractor called in an expert help, and the sarcophagus was opened to reveal a granite mummy case which once held the body of a human being more than 12 feet tall, a human with 6 toes, according to the carving of the case. But the body had been buried so many thousands of years that it had long since turned to dust. Just another silent witness to the truth of Genesis, which tells us that there were giants in the earth in those days. The excavation of over a dozen skeletons, 8 to 12 feet tall, around the world shocked archaeologists. These skeletons were positively human. Some of these skeletal remains are on Maui in lava caves near Ulapua, Lakua, and Olowalu. An example of this is the mysterious quote-unquote disappearance of more than 50 perfectly kept gigantic antediluvian skeletons between 10 and 14 feet tall found in a cave in Arizona. So wherever did all these skeletal remains go? Again, probably bought and disappeared by agents of the Smithsonian for whatever their agenda is and was and is now. They're not admitting to anything. As I went through it with Dr. Ken Fader on Coast to Coast, he and I went at it for a while, but first he had to dismiss the reality of the giants by saying, well, show me some skeletal remains, and he knows perfectly well you cannot do that in this country. Okay, all the native peoples, the laws that govern these sort of things are all in the hands of the native peoples and the Smithsonian, who work together and are often involved in archaeology done at these sites around the country. Native peoples who are studied to be archaeologists and anthropologists under the major universities. And I feel sorry for them because, they're getting a run around. Juniper, Arizona skeleton, twice the size. Skeleton of a giant found at Juniper. One of the most wonderful discoveries of prehistoric life that has been ever been made in Arizona was reported yesterday by Peter Marks. So this is the Peter Marks one again, of juniper and corroborated by E.S. Clark, attorney, which reveals the existence of a race of people that is not generally accredited to the primitive era in the huge proportions of a skeleton that is now in the possession of Mr. Marks. In detailing what was discovered by mere accident on his farm early in the present week, Mr. Marks gave the following interesting account of his discovery. The bones of this monstrous human may have represented a race of men or a single individual. At at any rate, the skeleton of the man in my possession is sufficiently complete so that the dimensions, which are astounding, may be accurately ascertained, and so far as the present generation is to be considered from what I can learn, there is no comparison to be formed. In the first place, the skull is of such an abnormal size that if an average... Okay, so this is the same thing all again that I already mentioned. This is, I guess that was a truncated article of it. And okay, so it goes on to talk about the teeth, several of which are still embedded in the jawbone, substantiate the immense size of the head. They are fully one-third larger than those of the men of today and present more the appearance of tusks than of molars of the human family. Other dimensions of the head reveal similar evidences in harmony with the above. As to the bones, there is no disputing the fact that the owner was symmetrically formed, of immense size and Herculean strength. The thighs and the lower limbs indicate at least twice the size of an average man today. I made the discovery by mere accident. My attention some weeks ago was directed to that part of the farm by flood waters passing through, cutting a ditch. A few bones were found on the surface, but my impression at the time was centered to the belief that they were those of some animal that had been killed. I dug into the bank that was exposed by the rushing waters, and when a distance of about 3 feet in depth had been reached, the skull was found. The bones that were strewn around for a few feet with those found in the ground were put together with the above result. The skeleton is only partially complete, but there is enough in evidence to show that it was that of a giant. After making this discovery, my observations were continued when metallic arrowheads and metallic spears, stone hooks to hold garments together, a plumb bob of stone, 2 inches in diameter and tapered to a point, stone axes and butcher knives, pottery of modern and primitive manufacture, and other articles were dug up. Nearby was evidently an old fort. The walls were built of immense boulders, indicating that persons of great strength performed the work. I have been the owner of that tract of land for for some 41 years and have resided there continuously. That section of the farm has never been cultivated to my knowledge or anyone else in that country. No other human frame has been found, although I intend to continue digging. The relics will be kept in my possession as I consider it a great curiosity. Mr. Clark has seen the skeleton visiting the valley after I made the discovery. So just a more detailed account, and I found it fascinating that these metal arrowheads and spearheads were found there, plumb bobs, etc. Was this a surveyor of his time, maybe a builder, one of the builders out there in with the giants of the past? I don't know, but it certainly suggests that. Walnut Creek giant skeleton refuses to sell skeleton of giant. So this is another story about Mr. March there. And just the point is that this guy refused to sell the skeleton to Smithsonian, but just to demonstrate that the Smithsonian was all agents of the Smithsonian were all over the place buying up these skeletal remains. And then because these are not official accounts documented by digs done by academics associated with the Smithsonian, then, whatever became of these things? Were they just cataloged and set aside and put in crates and boxes and forgotten about in fires or out the back door? Or whatever happened to these things? And whatever happened to this one that Mr. Marks refused to sell? It doesn't seem to say. There's no follow up on it. Reddington, twice the stature. Burial place of a race of giants is uncovered by rains. Douglas, Arizona. Recent heavy rains in the vicinity of Reddington near here have uncovered the burial grounds of a race of giant people who are thought to have lived thousands of years ago, according to August N. Ely, a miner who has been employed in the Reddington district. Ely described parts of the skeletons recovered from the cemetery and declared that the stature of the race must have been twice that of an average man of today. One skull showed a thickness of about an inch. So, an inch thickness skulls. I mean, no human beings today have inch thick skulls. Ely said, and was in a state of perfect preservation. Pieces of pottery, earrings, remains of charcoal fires, and other evidences uncovered by the rains has led Ely to report the discovery to the state university with the hope that a more intimate investigation would be made of the burial ground. So, was it? And the university did what? And what happened with that? And we'll never know. The simple fact of the matter, as we've gone through so far, and in my own conversations with Dr. Ken Fader, who writes books, has close ties with the Smithsonian, as many of the University of Connecticut archaeologists, geologists, like Dr. Robert Thorson about the stone walls of New England, is, giving misinformation out there about it. I mean, this is what's coming out of the uh, University of Connecticut anthropological departments and geological departments there, with these professors there misinforming everybody. A human monster at Mesa Rico. A giant skeleton, reminiscent find of a race without name or history. Santos Lopez came in from Chaparrito today and reports the country on the Mesa Rico Wild with excitement over the unearthing of the well-preserved skeleton of a human giant in that vicinity. Tradition had long whispered of the burial of such a human monster in that country, and Luviano Quintana organized a party of 5 persons to locate it. They found it on the premises of Quintana's ranch, the great grave being marked at the head and foot by rough-hewn building stone. The grave was 15 feet long and 8 feet in width. The body had been broken in order to get it into the grave, which was too short. The forearm, from wrist to elbow, measures 4 feet. The jawbone is a good 3 feet. Jawbone is a good 3 feet. Only the lower jawbone is preserved. In it is a tooth large enough for a milk stool. The ribs are enormous. The 5 men who saw the grave opened and who measured the dead giant agreed that his chest measurement could not have been less than 8 feet. Other rough tombstones in that vicinity indicate that thereabouts sleep other remnants of a race without a name and without a history written only in the bowels of the silent earth. Arizona Optic. So this is from 1902, the Desert News. So this thing was immense sized, with 8 feet across the chest. It's just unbelievable. 8 foot, 4 1/8 giant skeleton. The giant skeleton found in Arizona is supposed to be the remains of a prehistoric man. St. Louis, December 9th. A correspondent of the Globe Democrat writing from Nogales, Arizona, says yesterday from Mexicans were digging a grave at the cemetery half a mile north of town. The skeleton of a human giant was uncovered at a depth of 2.5 feet. The skull was accidentally split in two pieces by a blow from a pick. In size, it is double that of an ordinary skull, and the upper teeth are veritable tusks, ranging from 3 to 3.5 inches in length. From the stomach tooth to the swell in the jaw, it measures 4 inches. The rapidly receding forehead, not so noticeable among the Aborigines, is not a characteristic of the exhumed skull. A broad and not over-projecting forehead strengthens the belief that this was one of the prehistoric men whose monuments of industry still adorn the plains and valleys of Arizona. While many of the bones turned to dust as soon as they were exposed to the air, the ones connecting the elbow and shoulder are intact. They are monsters in length and thickness. Careful measurements of the skeleton place its height at 8 feet 4.5 inches. The skeleton will be sent to a museum, or 4 1/8. I don't know. Can't see it that well. So it's from the Library of Congress, Wichita Eagle, 1887. Yavapai County giant mummy, an Aztec mummy. An alleged discovery of a dried up prehistoric man at Jerome. The Jerome News gives an extended account of the alleged finding of a mummy in the United Verde mine. The finding of a mummy is a possible thing, but this alleged discovery coming so closely on the heels of the finding of the bogus petrified man will make the story to be received with a large decoction of salt. After giving a very plausible account of the discovery, the news spoils the story by claiming it to be that of Montezuma, the Aztec chief. The plausible story of the find, as given in the news, is as follows. The finding of a mummified man by workmen in the United Verde mines on Monday, December 3rd, created some little excitement in Jerome. The body is undoubtedly that of a man who, during life, was a giant. At least everything surrounding the find would signify that such was the case, as beside him was found a firearm somewhat similar to the shotgun used at the present time, but so large and of such weight that the average man of today could not pose it for shooting. Besides the gun, there were found near him working tools, all of which were manufactured of tempered copper, showing that the man must have been buried over 3,000 years ago, during the first age of copper. The body is well preserved, but has evidently shriveled, yet many of the most important parts have undoubtedly remained their natural size. The numerous articles found with the body would signify that he was a king of some renown. The find was made in a cave exposed by the late caving in of the Verde mines. It was with wonder and awe that the workmen first entered the cave and handled the relics that must have been laid away centuries ago. So isn't that fascinating, with this big, giant, huge gun that no man at that time could handle as a gun? We're talking about an age of gunpowder and guns, thousands of years before that possibly could be. So here's another one. Yavapai County 9-foot skeleton. Indian ruins provide new clues to life. Arizona is a storehouse, albeit easily pried into, for artifacts that would tell us much about the civilization that preceded us by centuries if an organized program were launched. Did you know that the skeletal remains of a mammoth have been uncovered in Arizona? Did you know that our own Yavapai County has given up a prehistoric camel? Did you know that now buried in the Walnut Grove area of Yavapai is the skeleton of a man at least 9 feet tall with front teeth formed like grinding molars? That's very interesting, and which never has been examined scientifically. It was dug up by a cowboy who immediately popped it back into its grave and recovered it. But he says he could take anybody back to the site and reproduce it, and probably others. Arizona holds many wonders awaiting discovery. And this is from the 50s, I think. 1953 or something like that. Yeah, Prescott Evening Courier, 1953. Okay, so the front teeth were like molars or just extremely worn down because as they were doing something, many of these giants were doing something with their teeth, so performing some task which wore their teeth, which otherwise were perfect, but whatever task they were doing, or perhaps something they were eating, let's say they were eating clams and other kinds of shellfish or whatever, perhaps in their great stature, they could just eat right through the clam, break the clam shells with their jaws, with their teeth. And maybe that's where some of the wear came from. I'm just supposing, or any of the plant materials they could have eaten in their such big stature and powerful jaws. They could eat a wider variety of plant materials than we certainly could. Indian cemeteries, 9 footers, multiple cemeteries full of 9 footers. Indian cemeteries are now being uncovered in Arizona, which bring to light skeletons of former inhabitants who were over 9 feet tall. Arizona has always been the home of big men. And this is what Chris Leslie says. Notice the pluralities in the words skeletons, inhabitants, men, and cemeteries. We are not talking about a few accounts of 9 footers, but verified cemeteries of 9 footers, more than one. Are there dozens, hundreds, or thousands in these cemeteries? How many still remain? These are questions that need to be answered, and they sure do. But we're never going to get the answers for them because of the laws on the books about the remains of Native Americans and their ancestors, you see. A giant's tread, interesting evidences of a prehistoric race from Arizona mountains. Was the Great West inhabited by a race of giants in prehistoric days? R.B. Laird, who was in Kansas City yesterday, claims to have new evidence that it was. He is a New England geologist who has spent many months in making investigations in the canyons, tablelands, and gorges of Arizona. He left for the East last night with his evidence in the shape of a voluminous typewritten manuscript carefully put away in a handbag. He declined to make public the full purport of the document. Mr. Laird makes no boast of having had a hand in the investigation, but says the discoveries were made by a guide who has been a resident of Williams, Arizona for many years, Arizona Territory, that's what AT stands for, and who has been in every nook and cranny in the mountains in that district. The claim that there existed in prehistoric times a race of giants is old, but proofs are not found every day. In this case, they were found in the shape of immense footprints which have become hardened in the limestone formations of the district. To substantiate his statements, Mr. Laird carries with him several photographs showing by comparisons with the foot of a miner the relative size of the giant's foot. Some idea of its great size can be gained when it is seen that the depression in the rock strata caused by the great toe is more than twice as large as the miner's foot. The fact that animals in prehistoric periods were of such immense size is advanced as an argument that man was also abnormally large. Laird is a firm believer in this theory, and so am I. It's a good one. The party of the explorers, which the guide who made the discoveries entered the vast un- untenanted desert, which is bordered by the mountains where the discoveries were made, suffered great hardships during the trip. Mr. Laird was one of the party, and he says they ran short of food and narrowly escaped being buried in the snow before they finally made their way back to civilization. Mr. Laird refuses to give any information about himself or the nature of his visit to the East. In addition to the document in which the guide tells his strange story of the expedition, he carries in his grip several excellent specimens of rubies, a rich deposit of which was discovered by the party. So and many of these giants were reported to be having been found with precious gems around them. 6'6" in depth, Phoenix, tall skeleton found near Phoenix. An Arizona farmer digs up a prehistoric man. J.A. Hansford, a well to do farmer living 3.5 miles east of Phoenix, recently found the skeleton of an Aztec, a prehistoric man, one of the citizens who peopled this valley centuries ago, and placed it under a high state of cultivation, built cities, dug canals, and leveled the surface of the valley. The discovery came by accident and was decidedly unexpected. Mr. Hansford was plowing and he encountered a spot where the earth would not yield to the steel plowshare. As water in this element employed in such cases, a stream was turned on, but still the ground would not plow. Like a good farmer determined to make the spot yield, he tried a mattock and began to dig the stubborn earth or cement. Presently something gave way, and soon a subterranean cavity was disclosed. This proved to be a room with walls of adobe. When this was cleared out, a soft spot was found in the cement floor about 6 feet from the fireplace. Following this to a depth of 2.5 feet, a human skeleton in a perfect state of preservation with teeth as natural as life was disclosed. The skeleton is 6 feet 6 inches in length, strong, with skull of regular shape and considerably above that of the average human being. Near the skeleton was a pretty drinking cup, evidently left by the remains to follow the custom that prevailed with the mound builders through the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. Mr. Hansford did not care for the skeleton, so he reburied it. But a Phoenix man was soon out, and he secured the trophy. The sepulchre or room was evidently the living apartment at one time of the dead man, and there were a fireplace and other evidences of home life. In the vicinity of Phoenix, there are many evidences of old ruins. In fact, a part, if not all, the city of Phoenix stands on the ruins of a buried city and a fallen empire. This is New York Times, 1896. Okay, so fascinating there. This report here of this sepulcher, which was actually the guy's living space in this adobe room that was buried for some reason, and the artifacts found with him sort of suggest high level of society. So again, these further back in time we go, it's just evidence of people being more advanced in several different aspects of their culture than it appears that the native peoples showed at the time of the explorers and the colonists and settlers. So, in any case, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. That was Arizona. So, Arizona had many, many accounts of giants, and particularly large ones, extremely large ones. We're talking maybe in the 18-footer range or bigger. So, again, just, the history of the past is so fantastic. It's even more fantastic than the Nephilim or the Anunnaki, whatever you choose to believe in there. But this seems to be more because there are also these dwarf peoples and tiny peoples and other types of humanoids all over the planet. So more like J.R.R. Tolkien's view of Middle Earth and the way that it was in the ancient past. Maybe that's a truth nugget there, okay? And there's no Nephilim or Anunnaki involved with the story at all. It's all just homegrown, and the story of the past is far different than we can possibly imagine. All right, guys. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and please do hit the like button, and I will be back with a video for you real soon. All right, guys. Everybody take care. Take care of yourselves. Hope everyone's well. All right. Bugcat7 signing out. Peace.